Hi there, good afternoon. My name's Joseph Stannard. I'm Deputy Editor of The Wire magazine, which hopefully some of you at least are familiar with. And today the guest who I'm talking to, The Bug versus Earth, which is Dylan Carlson here. And Kevin Martin. So let's get straight into it. I wanted to kind of ask with a very kind of obvious basic question, I think, which is when did you guys respectively become aware of each other's music?
You can go first.
I was working as a, I think it was a, hate to say it, a journalist for a magazine at Tower Records. And I got sent Earth 2. And I mean, I've said it to Dylan before, I thought it was pretty unlistenable because I'd never heard anything like it, and I just couldn't believe that anything could be that slow, you know. But actually, it's like one of those classic records. A lot of the things I end up liking most when I first hear, I can't grasp. Yeah. It could be Ian Curtis's voice, it could be Albert Ayler's saxophone playing. Earth 2 was that for me. It got under my skin. But then I drifted away and I didn't really hear anything else until Hex came out. And the Hex album really blew my head off.
I guess I first heard of Kevin through Simon Fowler. I saw King Midas Sound open for at La Scala, which I couldn't watch because of the strobe lights, but I sat outside and listened to it. So that was, I guess, when I first became aware of what Kevin does. And then later went back, and Simon, played me the classics like London Zoo and stuff. And then after I met Kevin, then I realized he had played sax on a record by a band I knew on Sub Pop, weirdly enough, the Hypnotics.
I told you not to.
But, so yeah, I guess that's sort of how musically we became aware of each other. And then we actually did the Colt and Boa thing before we'd actually ever met. And then
that was a 12-inch, wasn't
it?
That came out, yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of done, I guess, long-distance collaboration. And then we ran into each other by sheer happenstance in, was it Krakow?
Yeah.
Yeah, Krakow at, what was that, Unsound?
Yep.
Yeah, Unsound. That was our first meeting in person, walking down the street in Krakow.
The atmospheric streets of the crumbling...
Yeah.
I was actually looking for a cake shop.
Right.
Dylan and I both are afflicted by extreme sweet tooth tendencies.
Yeah.
Did you find the cake shop?
I was the one looking at that point.
Yeah, no, we were going back to the hotel at that point.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Excellent. If you take nothing else away from this Q&A, then that is actually quite an important point, I think.
Sugar is a major driving force.
A major fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the, I guess, what was the route towards Concrete Desert in terms of like the build up towards actually getting together? Because you recorded it in LA, right? Daddy Kev's studio. How did all that kind of cohere, and how easy was it for that to kind of like for you to both end up at a space where you could actually produce something full length?
Well, I guess Kevin had done some shows in Brazil, yeah, and had been working on some sketches, and then Ninja Tune wanted us to play was it their 25th anniversary show there in LA or something? Some kind of anniversary thing. And so And then I was in LA, I think, visiting with my manager. So it was sort of like, oh, well, we're already here. And then he had the sketches. So we decided, rather than doing it like long distance style, to book studio time. And I could do my guitar parts then. And then he could take them back to his lair and fiddle with them.
Yeah, I mean, the initial idea was just to do an EP. And we both talked about doing a follow-up to the first single. And I ended up writing more sketches than I expected. And I think Dylan probably thought I was a bit mad when I suddenly said, hey, let's try and make an album. And when it was Ninja Tune that suggested Daddy Kev's studio. I knew of it, of course, because of the Flying Lotus. Flying Lotus had been a friend of mine at one point, and was aware, and I liked that idea. I thought it was like a weird triangle then, just the atmosphere of working there. And Dylan put his parts on the sketches, which he hadn't heard before until we were in there. And because we hadn't really, when we'd met in Krakow, it was a very short meeting, and I think I went to see Earth play somewhere in Berlin, and we met very briefly then. But when we were in the studio, it was the first time we really got a chance to talk openly about music.
Yeah.
So the 2 days we spent in there were really, it was a way of getting to know him as an individual and what he's capable of as a guitarist, and to find what middle ground existed, if any. I think Dylan risked his reputation working with me, and I had no idea.
I don't have much of a reputation, so that's okay.
I didn't know so much about Dylan personally, and I certainly didn't know that much about his musical tastes. I only knew the output of Earth.
Yeah.
So I knew that I wanted to try and do something that was fresh. But the same as with Boa, when we worked on Boa, the sketches I sent him, my initial idea was to slow dub classics, like reggae classics, down to a very slow level and then send them to Dylan. So like the cuss cuss rhythm, I remember being one of the rhythms I sent to him slowed down. And once I heard what he did, I totally reworked the whole EP. And actually that's what happened with the album too. What Dylan put on the sketches in the studio made me totally re-examine my original sketches. So it's been a constantly morphing record, and also live thing too. And for me, the challenge was, once I got the puzzle back to Berlin of Dylan's guitar parts, and then suddenly not feeling happy with my original sketches, how to make that into a narrative structure, and the conceptual side of the record came after the fact, once I'm back in Berlin, trying to understand what had happened in LA socially as well as musically. And it was like trying to make a puzzle, a scrambled puzzle, make sense, and that's really what Concrete, how it sort of developed.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment when it clicked into place that you thought, yes, this is actually how we can proceed with the recordings, as in the sort of pieces, the stems?
I mean, I ran the ideas past Dylan once I was back in Berlin.
Yeah.
When we were in LA, it was more just trying to find the common ground that we both wanted to attach to the musical backing that was already there.
Yeah.
So for me, really what put it together, and as I've made more and more music down the years, I've realized what's crucial for me is I'm a scatterbrain, I'm just a daydreamer, and I need something to anchor me down. And just the idea of, I think the title Hell A stuck in my head, and I just, no matter how much I wanted to enjoy LA on that visit, and it was the first prolonged visit I'd had in LA, and I remember having never really enjoyed LA before, but I remember before going on that visit, Code 9 telling me LA's really changed and you could really love it now. And I remember laughing with friends saying, hey, maybe I'll move to LA. But I felt so completely alienated from the city. And from the whole experience, the show wasn't a very good show, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It didn't gel particularly between us musically at the show. There was a lot of jarring elements around the performance. It was a difficult meeting with Ninja Tune in the States around the record. So it was a sort of uncomfortable visit.
Right, yeah.
And somehow once I was in Berlin trying to find method to the madness of what was in front of me, lots of stuff. It was really, okay, if I can center this on LA, I was trying to envisage musically how the impressions LA had upon me, and whether or not I could reflect that sonically with what we had, and how I could adapt to what Dylan had. Dylan's sound was so open-ended and atmospheric anyway. It was just how I could entwine around that and develop or rearrange the material I would already given him.
Right, yeah. Do you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, I don't know. Kevin is more of more on the technical side, I guess, so like equipment-wise and studio-wise and stuff like that. Whereas I just sort of, I'm just a gunslinger and come and lay down tracks and. I've been to LA. I lived in LA, so I guess I brought my version of LA to the table.
Do you share some of Kevin's sort of feeling of alienation in LA?
Yeah, my LA I think is definitely different than. I actually like LA for a weird reasons, because it's so like, I don't know. It's kind of a take it or leave it city. It's like you don't really. It doesn't compromise with you. You either like deal with it or not. My LA. When I lived in LA, it was during the missing years. So I have I guess a fairly dark view of the city for that reason. But I still like it. But I think a lot of people's only experience of LA is ever like West LA and Hollywood and. The entertainment industry, and like the city is like that definitely looms large in its landscape, but it's also like this crazy like patchwork of like, you can go to parts of town where you'll never hear English spoken, it's definitely it's a big place to come to grips with, that's for sure. So I guess I don't know. Yeah, my view of LA, I guess, runs the gamut from highs to the Skid Row. So yeah.
So, Kevin, you mentioned the having to kind of pin yourself in a way onto some kind of narrative structure in order to kind of make sense of the material you had. Did that mean that, in a way, you had to start kind of thinking cinematically about the material and about how it could possibly fit together? Because I think much has been made about the album sounding quite sort of cinematic and widescreen and kind of...
But again, for me, that just reflects LA. The whole thing about LA is it's supposedly the center of the American dream, because American fantasy is based around Hollywood.
Yeah.
So if it ended up cinematic, it was just because it was linked to what I feel is the fantasy of LA and America, you know, as an outsider.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I was there for a week. I've been there quite a few times. Dylan lived there, you know, but it was just that rush of impression and that another confirmation of the fact that I felt successively more and more alienated from a city that many people were recommending to me. And if anything, it wasn't setting out in any way to be cinematic. It was just setting out to give a sonic impression of expansiveness and just the endlessness of emptiness within a highly densely populated city, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a cinematic city. It's like, you know, film is embedded in its DNA. It was created by, you know, orange growers and filmmakers. It's like, it's the whole reason the place exists. You know, it doesn't exist for any other reason. It's like a horrible location for a city. It's like, ecologically, it's like, the natural water supply can only support 13,000 people, and there's like 42 million people in the LA basin. They steal water from 7 states to keep the city running. It's like they steal power or buy power from all over the West, you know, to keep the city going. It's a huge scam, basically, and it has been from the get-go. Real estate scams, water scams.
Which ties into Hollywood as well.
Yeah. It's just like, I mean, I guess it's like America at large. I mean...
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things I think about Concrete Desert is that obviously there's a crossover between your respective aesthetics and abilities, but there's also the kind of like you were saying, the pyramid, which the other point being Daddy Kev and the kind of like LA beat scene. I know DJ Nobody, I think, engineered the record, is that right?
Yeah, Kev was only there for minutes, literally, to introduce us to Nobody.
Okay.
And I'd never met Nobody before. I'd met Daddy Kev before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how was he to work with? Because he's someone that, I mean, I think he's kind of like, he's not that well known to a lot of people, but he's put out quite a few, like, I think he put out an album called Soulmates, which I think...
He was just smoking a really big bong before we even started work.
Really?
He's a nice guy, though.
He was very nice.
Good taste in music, too.
It's Elvin, isn't it? Elvin Estella. Yeah.
Yeah, he likes a lot of different kinds of music, too. So.
He just seemed very stoned and very shocked by what he was listening to.
Right. In a positive way?
In his way.
Okay. I mean, is that kind of, is that strain of music, like beat-driven music, the Flying Lotus, DJ Nobody, kind of who else is out there? I guess Cutmar, who's really a British guy, but lived out there for a bit as well. Is that something that's kind of on your radar as musicians and as appreciators of music?
I asked Flylo to play my London Zoo launch party, and I saw his first London show, and I thought it was mind-blowing at that time. Even though it was obviously pretty much indebted to Jay Dilla, just his approach, where he was just atomizing beats, and trippy as hell, very psychedelic, and just so passionate about what he did was great. But in terms of the whole scene... I can appreciate it, but I like fire in music. I prefer New York hip-hop than LA hip-hop. Beatless hip-hop.
Right, yeah.
But people like Ras G, I think, are incredible. He doesn't get talked about very much.
That's true. Yeah.
And I particularly like him because as many people will come into his shows, that many people leave during his shows. Because he takes chances, you know, and he's trying to do something fresh. And he has character and emotion in his music. A lot of problems I have with instrumental electronic music is it's a slave to its own machinery. And I'm always looking for electronic music that somehow can convey intensity and emotion.
Yeah, and transcends its own technology, essentially. Yeah. I mean, the technology involved in the album, this specific album, Concrete Desert, I mean, was it a conscious effort on your part to kind of keep it as... It's fairly stripped down, I think, in terms of your contributions and also your own. So was that a kind of... Was it intentional to make it quite stark and quite high impact with a few limited inputs for the listener to kind of connect with?
I mean, when we were in the studio, what was interesting, we'd already, I can't remember when or how, if it was around King Midas, I knew Dylan dug dub, you know, and when we were in the studio, we talked a lot about spaciousness and minimalism, actually.
Yeah.
We talked about the Velvet Underground, the Stooges, stuff that we were and are both passionate about. And a lot of it revolved around minimalism, repetition, and spaciousness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't use a lot of technology in my world, so a couple pedals and an amp, and I mean, and I played a lot of the tracks on that album. I just went straight into the amp a lot, and maybe even just one pedal, I think, on that one.
Yeah, I was quite shocked because I imagined Dylan being this, like, I don't know why, but just this uber nerdy, 1,000,001 pedals. And I remember being slightly disappointed when I walked in the room, and he just, because I'm a complete gear slut, and my studio is like a spaceship, and I collect pedals left, right, and center. So for me, my jaw hit the floor because it was so little, and his tone was so maximal, you know. And then I just realized, like Justin Broadrick and I joke a lot that it doesn't matter what there is to make sound, we're going to make sound and make it our own. And I think that's, for me, true of Dylan. You know, Dylan's artistry is his craftsmanship. It's not about how many pedals he's got, you know, and I've come to appreciate that, obviously, working with him and touring with him.
I'm interested to actually hear a little bit, Dylan, about your sort of your enthusiasm for dub, actually. When did that... Do you remember when that kind of hoved into view as a kind of area of interest?
It happened in high school. Me and my friends were experimenting with mind-altering substances, and and during one particularly intense acid trip, they all went off to go listen to whatever, Sgt. Pepper's or whatever you do when you're a teenager and you take acid for the first time. And I got into Burning Spear's first album and the dub version of it, and instead. So I guess that's sort of where it started. And then, I don't know, I just picked up stuff I liked along the way. Like, I mean, I certainly don't account myself an expert in the field or anything like that, but and then when I lived in LA, the only album I bought during the 4 years I was there was that Mezzanine record, and then I guess from that, when I got back into music, I went and, you know, got some Horace Andy dub stuff and Prince Jammy, and then actually, weirdly enough, the first time I ever came to London in '95, Earth played this Dissolution or Dissolute Fest or something that Paul Smith had put on. But the next night, Russell Haswell took me to a Josh Shaka show at the Forum. And it was like the loudest thing I've ever seen, and the longest thing I've ever seen. It was like 8 hours of this massive dub. And I don't know, and it was great. my favorite part of the trip, I guess. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where it came from.
So in terms of the sort of sonic immensity of something like a Jar Shaka show, I mean, did that kind of consciously or unconsciously kind of find its way into your own techniques of creating your own version of?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I view it kind of. I mean, there's like dub, as in, you know, which is usually associated with reggae music, but to me, it's like a whole kind of method as well of doing things, and it's you know, like we discussed, it was a method that involves space and a minimal amount of you know, I mean, all that, like all the Black Ark stuff, you know, that Lee Perry did was done with a, you know, 4-track and a space echo, you know. It's not like high tech by any means, so so yeah, I guess that's what appeals to me about it, is that kind of like, again, it's, you know, making music by any means necessary, and not, you know, not worrying about the latest gizmo or gear or, you know, state of the art anything.
Yeah. And another thing I wondered about Concrete Desert was there ever a temptation, because obviously, Kevin, you're quite well known for working with a variety of different vocalists from a variety of different backgrounds, going back to, I mean, we were just talking about the album, the Ice album, and of course, obviously with The Bug, and of course the last Earth album, Primitive and Deadly, was largely vocal centered.
Yeah.
So was there ever a temptation to to kind of incorporate vocals into Concrete Desert, or would that have been maybe just one element too far, or was that just not what you wanted to actually?
Joe, you haven't done your research.
Oh, what
Justin
have I done?
Broderick does vocals on 2 tracks.
Apart from Justin, I meant, yeah, I was going to ask about Justin. I did know that. But
So yeah, he is incorporated,
But in
and
terms
very
of-
specifically, because
Yeah.
for me, he comes from Birmingham,
Yeah.
Lisa. Which, when Justin was growing up in Birmingham, wasn't a particularly pleasant place in the areas he grew up. And for me, with Godflesh, it epitomized urban hell for me. And he seemed the obvious person for me to try and... There's a track he'd done with Painkiller, which he'd done at the end of his tour when his voice was completely shot. And I used as a reference to ask him if he could do something in that lines for to revoice the tracks.
Yeah.
It appealed to me to revoice the tracks because I love how reggae revoices rhythms.
Yeah.
And I wanted what he did on that track with Painkiller. The name of the track eludes me, but it was just really impressionistic howling screams, like just a scream into the abyss.
Yeah.
And for me, that suited him being on the extra tracks. Ninja Tune, actually being a business, really wanted to have him on the album. But Dylan and I discussed it, and we both felt there should be no vocals on the album itself, and that's why
Right.
Justin appears on the 12-inch.
Right,
Not
yeah.
that it's any lesser, it's just I felt and Dylan felt it was it should be kept as a very separate entity.
Right, yeah. Like a kind of epilogue or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about Justin's voice in particular is it's immensely vulnerable, as well as kind of within a very often aggressive form of music, like Godflesh, even Yezu at times. There's something of him. It does feel like the scream of a tiny soul in the middle of a larger landscape.
By and large, I find metal vocals unlistenable. But somehow I've always thought Justin's vocals were, like you say, it's not so cartoony, and there's something genuinely personal and emotional and sensitive in the howling. You know, he has a great broken voice, you know, and also as a friend, you know, I've kept working with Justin throughout the years because of mutual respect, but also because we share a similar vision. And I just knew he would get what we were trying to get at with the album and with the tracks.
And how was that kind of conducted? Presumably he didn't provide his parts in person, or
no. I mean, that's, for me, there's always been this snooty music can't work by mail. Mostly in the media. That it can't be good if it's done by mail. I think that's horseshit, really. You know, I think if you're a craftsman, you make your craft work, whatever the setting. You know, of course, do I prefer working in person with Dylan? Yeah, I prefer it. You know, but actually the guitar parts Dylan gave me for Boa and Cold, I think are incredible. You know, but I much more enjoyed being able to shoot ideas off each other in real time.
Yeah.
It just, by mail, just basically means it's a longer process. But with Justin, there was no long process. He hit the nail on the head with both tracks, and I knew he would. I mean, he's a killer, you know. So it was never a question that I thought I would have to. I just gave him the initial references and the backing tracks, and knew he'd come up with the goods, which he did.
Well, I mean, you've worked with Justin like for years now, going back to Techno Animal. Did he ever contribute to God, in fact?
Yeah, he was a guitarist on the Virgin album. In fact, both studio albums. And he played live shows too.
So, I mean, as you say, he kind of like instinctively almost knew what would work in that. Do you find that happens just generally working with him? Because you worked together for so long, you have a sort of unspoken understanding between you, really, sonically, I mean.
Yeah, I think the only thing we ever disagreed about was Hawkwind, and the only argument we ever had in the studio, the only time we had crossed words was when I didn't like a guitar part, and he got a bit pissed and said, the difference between you and I is I like Hawkwind and you don't. And that's the only crossed words we ever had in all the time we've known each other. So I must have really crossed a line for him, or he must have really liked that guitar part. But generally, he's like a little brother to me.
Yeah.
You know, or not little, I mean, he's like a brother. You know, I've known him for years, and shared experiences, shared lifestyles, shared views of the world. So for me, you just know what you'll get with Justin, which is craft, passion, and freshness. You know?
Yeah, he definitely seems to be an artist with an intense commitment to literally everything he puts himself to. You know, it's kind of...
That's what happens when you like Hawkwind.
I mean, talking about the kind of like the dub influence and also the... why don't you like it? No, never mind, I'm not going to get into that. Do you think there's any scope for a kind of an album of maybe versions of Concrete Desert? Has that crossed your mind at all?
No, because it's versioned already, really.
Right,
because the original structures were more... There was more there, and it was more layered. So it's already a ghost of the original... demos, really.
Yeah.
So for me, it would make no real sense
to do it over it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ninja Tune probably wouldn't pay for it.
True.
I mean, you mentioned going back to kind of like the live presentation, if you like, or live performance. You mentioned there was a gig in LA that didn't really go quite well. There were some maybe unpleasant elements that kind of surrounding that, and it didn't gel. Was it a challenge to actually go from that to actually the point where, obviously, it does work live? I think as anyone who, you know, saw these guys last night will attest, it works. So was that difficult?
It took a while.
to?
I mean, I'd say like, I mean, we've been talking about like, I mean, we'd have good shows on previous versions, but like this trip, the last 4 shows, it really seems to have like come like gelled or come together or whatever, like where we're like actually like really playing off one another, really like expanding the tracks live, improvising live with the tracks and hitting it like right every night. Like the previous ones, like there were nights that were like amazing, and then other nights were
Yeah, I mean,
more awkward, I guess, or felt awkward to us anyway. Like, I mean, that's the thing about music too, is like ultimately what we think doesn't really matter. It's the audience that decides what's a good show and what's a bad show. So,
I mean, for me in LA, I was just embarrassed that I'd felt that I could tell Dylan wasn't happy. And I didn't know Dylan so well at that time.
Right.
And I just was like embarrassed. It was one of those things, you try your best. For many different reasons, it just didn't gel. And we emptied at least 2/3 of the audience. And when I started making music with God, my whole philosophy was to empty venues. That made me very happy.
Yeah.
But now I just see it as a failure.
Right, yeah.
You know, and the nature of what we're doing or trying to do is evolutionary, and it mutates and morphs, which is a huge strength for me. And a lot of what we did last night and this week that's suddenly helped it gel, as far as I'm concerned, is find ways to make the improvisations work and to dub out the material that's there technically and mentally. You know, to a lot of what we do, because we're so, I'm probably the guilty one particularly, so how do I say it? Committed to a certain live impact. It can vary. A good show or a bad show can depend on the monitors or how helpful the staff at a venue are.
Yeah.
And the imponderables are playing. You know, I think Dylan's, I don't know, the output that I know of Dylan, I'm guessing he hasn't worked with so many electronic musicians in the style that I work. I think I played devastatingly loud on stage, which is, I think, very unusual for Dylan. So I think he's been very trusting in me, which is very flattering. And I've felt at the LA show pressure on me, and that's why I'm saying I felt embarrassed.
Yeah.
Because I feel I invited Dylan to this thing, this beast, and I felt I'd let him down with that show. You know, whereas now I feel the friendship's really developed strongly with Dylan now, you know, which, considering when we met, in so many ways we are opposites. What we found is increasingly there's more and more similarities than I would have ever guessed, working with Dylan and as a person.
What are the kind of... I'm really interested in that kind of meeting in the studio and the conversation that took place about finding some sort of musical common ground. I mean, did any specific kind of almost totemic musical entities kind of, did you share any specifically? Did that kind of happen easily or instantly, or did it take a while?
Yeah, I mean, we just started riffing on, like, you know, the jazz we liked, and then the dub we liked, and then the Stooges, and, you know, the rock we liked.
We both said I remember.
I mean, Kevin's also been trusting because he hates guitars, so it's like, and metal kind of. So it's like,
it's true.
And I obviously like both.
We talked a lot about. One thing we both agreed on is Sacrilegious, Struck by Lightning. We both prefer Alice Coltrane to John Coltrane's music.
Right.
Which would have been blasphemy to any jazzer for up until very recently. And we talked about Spacemen 3 and the Velvet Underground and how we felt Spacemen 3 never got their props. And just talked a lot about how we felt texture and tonality were crucial amongst the things that we loved. And just an honesty in the approach, you know, and That's all I can remember from that studio session. And it wasn't like I was saying to Dylan, can you play something like Sister Ray? There's never anything like that. He would play something and then I'd say, hey, did you ever like blah, blah, blah? You know, and it was just more like that.
I'm interested in the Coltrane aspect, because obviously there's a performance later on today of some Alice Coltrane music. And what is it specifically about her music that you think elevates it above, for you, above John Coltrane's? Or why do you prefer it, essentially?
I don't know, I find it more lyrical and just more beautiful, I guess, at the end of the day. I mean, not to say there's not Coltrane, there's Coltrane I like, too, John Coltrane I like, but her stuff I just find more...
Yeah, I mean, likewise.
I guess, at the end of the day, more matches my aesthetics more, I guess you could say.
I mean, likewise, I think my first instrument was a saxophone, and the first jazz album I ever bought was A Love Supreme, which was totally by chance. I can't say I had any knowledge about it. I just liked the sleeve, and I'd heard that he was a good saxophone player. And I think John Coltrane's fucking incredible. But Alice Coltrane, again, it's like I said earlier, a lot of the music I like most ends up being music that I wasn't sure about when I first heard it.
Yeah.
And Journey to Satchidananda is just like one of the most incredible records. And I never get tired of it for many reasons. I think there's an immersive quality. With John Coltrane, it's easy to just be in constant admiration of his technique and be aware of the notes. With Alice Coltrane, it just feels like you get lost in the fluidity of it and you just sink into get immersed in the mood. And also she uses vocals, and I'm heavily drawn to vocals. I like vocals. So there's many different aspects, but like Dylan said, the beauty of the music and the playability. You can play Alice Coltrane records over and over. John Coltrane records, like a lot of the most freer jazz stuff, I honestly can't play Albert Ayler 10 times a day, but I can listen to an Alice Coltrane album on loop.
Yeah. There's an almost, I think for me as a listener to Alice Coltrane, there's an almost kind of like painful poignancy to like some of the stuff. It really drags you in, kind of like, in the most beautiful, lovely possible way, kind of tears your heart out. You know.
Yeah, there's a feeling of sacredness and spirituality. And actually, the funny thing for me, when we came off stage yesterday, I remember saying to Dylan, I felt drugged coming off the stage. And that's a good thing, because I don't do drugs. But I think we're both really interested in tapping into how sonic frequencies affect brainwaves. And the volume thing has fuck all to do with being macho or loud for loudness sake. It has to do with trying to physically change your DNA and take you somewhere literally with sound. That it doesn't just become background. You know, for me, a big danger of music now is that music's becoming increasingly relegated to a background lifestyle accessory. You know, and for me, a lot of the shows that I've seen and enjoyed most and that have stayed with me are ones that have resonated deeply inside me. And I don't mean like deeply, like, you know what I mean? It's just, you just don't recover. It alters your DNA somehow, you know, and I think really that's what I'm most love about working with Dylan, because I just sense, we've never talked about that, to be honest, but I've just sensed that he's on that same wavelength, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that I see a show nowadays that really just like blows me away like it used to. Which, I mean, don't know if that's because I've been doing it too long or I'm just jaded, which I hope not, but, you know, like you said, it's like music is increasingly like this background or lifestyle accessory rather than like, you know, I mean, you can tell the people that make music because they have to, and those are the people that do stuff that's like worth investigating, hearing, you know, like the people that can't do anything else, you know. No, I can't.
I mean, do you think this kind of like tendency towards background lifestyle accessory music, does that apply to both kind of mainstream, the kind of stuff you hear every day in shops or in cafes, as well as what might
across the board easily,
yeah. Yeah. Even obviously underground's a bit of a contested term nowadays because no one even knows if it exists.
Yeah.
However, yeah, there's
I mean, you can see it in the whole, you know, niche marketing and like the endless parsing of microgenres and then like I read interviews with bands and it's like they're talking about influences, like, oh, we're influenced by this band that's from like 2006 or something, and it's just like that's not an influence. That's like, you know, and then it's almost like they decide, oh, we're going to play this kind of genre when they get together, whereas like, I don't know, I mean, I admit I'm a dinosaur, but like, you know, back in my day, it was like, oh, you just got together and saw what happened. It wasn't like you decided like, okay, we're going to do this, you know. Like,
and that's how you arrive at a sound of your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like, you know, like, oh, I want to sound like the last Coldplay record or whatever. Like, that's not like...
That's the scariest thing, that there might be some people out there who do genuinely want to sound like the last Coldplay record, which is like terrifying.
And more power to them, but I'm not going to listen.
I could feel a pit open in my stomach just at the very... Anyway, but with that in mind, with the kind of splintering of everything, and there seems to be like a market for every single variation of every kind of permutation of music, is it perhaps more important than ever that people like yourselves are actually hybridizing and collaborating and kind of working together? Does that have, do you think, an effect counter to that in a way?
I hope so. I mean, it's like when I get asked, like, what kind of music do you play? You know, it's like, you can figure, you know what I mean? I just play, like with Earth, like, we're just a rock and roll band and always have been, and that's how I look at it. And if you want to call us whatever microgenre, you know, go for it. But, you know, I don't think rock and roll is a dirty word, and I'm fine with that. And then, you know, what we do, I don't know. That's just what we do. It doesn't need a, I don't know, tag, I guess.
Well, obviously you're touring Concrete Desert, and I guess the next logical question for me to ask really is this a one-off kind of situation, or is there likely to be more collaborative work in future? Do you envisage a second album for the project, and do you have any kind of like ideas of what kind of form it might take?
I mean, we've discussed wanting to do another one. I don't think we've really discussed what it would be. That we'll leave that for...
I mean, Dylan and I did mention it to each other, but it's ended up, for me, I could think of 4 different types of album we could make since working with him, you know, and yeah, I definitely want to keep working with Dylan.
Excellent. Well, I think now might be a kind of nice time to throw the floor open a bit and ask if anyone has any questions for Dylan or Kevin at all out there.
Don't be shy.
Go for it. Speak now. Or now. Or now. I guess that's no. I don't see any hands. It's always a dicey part of the procedure, you know. Hi. No. Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks,
you, Joe.
Dylan. Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you.
It's
Nice
been
to
a
meet you.
pleasure.
Again.
And enjoy the rest of the festival. Are you hanging around for a little bit and watching a few things, or are you speeding off back to wherever, or are you touring
No,
elsewhere?
I desperately wanted to stay an extra night because I want to see many things. Rob Lowe, Sunrise Band, Alice Coltrane. I mean, the curation is incredible at this event. You know, yeah. So no, I'll be here.
We were just talking about Pharoah Sanders a minute ago. That was kind of like last night. That was kind of.
I was packing up cables, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. You missed his dancing.
Dylan
I went.
saw them.
Yeah.
I packed up quick.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin Martin, Dylan Carlson.
Thank you, guys.
A round of applause.
Thank you.